morning, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary students, and basically everybody. You are all very welcome here. This is week 1 of British Art Through 10 Centuries. Actually, it's going to take longer than 10 centuries, and as you'll see in a moment, I would like to start long before the Common Era, in the prehistoric period, and from the very first evidence of artifacts and architecture, you might say, on the British soil. So that's going to be Stonehenge and even older monuments, as you will see in a moment. So this is week 1 of 14 weeks, and each week you'll get the next installment of the course. We will also have live meetings, as I hope you all know from your mail. And if you have any questions, if you have anything to add, you are very welcome to do it during the live meetings. So let's begin. I guess that's the first part. We'll start with prehistoric Britain, and basically I would like to start each subsection with a work of art, a painting from a later period, to show you how these earlier times inspired later generations of artists. So here we have a classicist painter from the second half of the 18th century, Thomas Jones. You don't really have to know all these names, I will tell you, and the names of the artists are really important. But just look at the image, the painting called The Bard, and it really shows the elements that became a kind of stereotype of the prehistoric and Celtic monuments in Britain for the artists living much later. So we have a rugged landscape with the mountains, with weather-beaten trees. We have a bard, so the priest or a wise man from Celtic culture, a poet also, with his musical instrument, with kind of associations with the Celtic culture that was destroyed by the Roman invaders. And if you look very close, or if you look up this painting in better quality, you'll see that the Roman invaders are indeed coming. So this is the reason why the bard, probably the last of his tribe, is so distressed. But something I would really like to draw your attention to in this painting is in the middle background. What you can really discern is the image of Stonehenge. Stonehenge in the Celtic mountains, probably somewhere in Wales. And those of you who have been to Stonehenge and have visited the site know it is not in the mountains. It's actually on the plains of Wiltshire, in a very flat area, and you can see it very well even from the motorway. So this is quite interesting. It really shows that Stonehenge, as a kind of mysterious monument to a long-gone civilization, became so emblematic that the artist here decided to relocate it to a more mysterious and quote-unquote Celtic landscape of the Welsh mountains. So as you'll see in a moment, this is not the only painting featuring Stonehenge. This is probably the strangest one, the one that takes the monument away from its real location and puts it in some legendary place, really. But let's now look at the real monuments and what really survives from the earliest period of prehistory in Britain. And every so often, probably every week, I will suggest to you some documentaries, some films and other materials that you may watch. So for this week, for week 1, there is a very interesting BBC documentary, 2-part documentary. The first part, consisting of 2 episodes, is called Britain BC, like before Christ, and the second part, consisting of 3 episodes, is called Britain AD, like Anno Domini. This is the old notation of the eras. Now the more common notation is BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era, because Christianity did not really spread throughout the world, so sometimes it's not very precise to date monuments coming from cultures other than Christian using the Christian notation, but you can still use both if you wish. So this documentary is precisely about what I'm going to talk about this week, namely the prehistoric monuments, the Celtic monuments, Roman Britain, and also the early Anglo-Saxon Britain. So you can watch it. It's not only about the arts, but of course about the culture, history, the events. They all obviously influence the development of the arts, and especially in those early periods when we do not really have painting yet, we do not have the names of any artists, we have some artifacts, some of which may be more practical, but they still have the aesthetic value and some decoration. Some of them could be the earliest examples of works created for purely artistic and aesthetic values. We have some buildings, so we may talk about architecture, but whether or not you could call things like Stonehenge a monument of architecture is still quite debatable. I think you could, but definitely we do not really know everything about these sites. We do not know who exactly created them, for exactly what purpose. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding this period, and it's very, very good idea to connect the discussion of the earliest periods in British art with culture and history in general. So we'll probably start talking about artists and paintings and such things with the Renaissance, with Holbein and the earliest signed and known works in British history, although not yet, as you can see, by British artists. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So prehistoric Britain. There are some wonderful monuments, some of them actually much older than Stonehenge. Everybody knows about Stonehenge, but there are some older monuments, and many of these Neolithic sites come from the north of the British Isles, from the Orkney Islands, so the archipelago north of Scotland. There are some interesting sites there. I've never been there. I've been to many of these places, but not yet there. Possibly there will be a chance of visiting the Orkneys sometime in the future. I hope so. So one of the places I'd like to visit is actually a UNESCO site. So it's a well-known and appreciated Neolithic site called Skara Brae. It is a Neolithic village which consists mostly of a series of round houses built of stone, and the fundaments and some parts of the walls of these houses have survived. And in the picture here you have part of the interior of one of these houses, probably the best preserved house in Skara Brae. And as you can see, there is something you could call a piece of furniture here, a cupboard, a shelf. And on some of these shelves in those round houses, some strange objects were found. Well, some practical objects as well. As you can see here, there are some objects made of bone that could have practical purpose, so they could be used as needles or little weights for weaving, or they could be ornamental, like this bone and animal tooth necklace. But among different objects, those strange round shapes, those strange round objects were discovered. They're not big, they're like this perhaps, and they are in the British Museum. So many of today's images you can actually Google on the websites of the British Museum and read more about them. They were made of granite stone, so very hard stone that is particularly difficult to process and to carve something out of it, and really nobody knows what they were for. They were very meticulously done, and they are perfect shapes, as you can see. So very likely they took a lot of time to be made, and the archaeologists and art historians and generally people interested in prehistoric culture have been wondering ever since what their purpose was. Most seem to agree that perhaps they didn't have a purpose. Perhaps they were just status symbols. They were expensive, beautifully crafted objects that proclaimed that whoever owned them was a rich and important member of the local community. So probably this could be seen as one of the earliest examples of artistic action, of artistic behavior in the British Isles, probably alongside some cave paintings or images of animals carved on bone by prehistoric people. So this is what we have. I mentioned the village in Skara Brae already, but there are more evidence of architecture or building throughout the British Isles, not only in Great Britain, the island of Great Britain, or the Scottish Islands, but also this proves that Britain was part of a larger culture, the culture that was found in continental Europe, in Brittany, in France, for example, the Neolithic culture. There are quite a lot of surviving Neoliths in Western France, also in Ireland, and the next example here comes from Ireland, another well-known and well-appreciated site called Newgrange. And this is a tomb. This is a structure that most likely served as a tomb for some important, probably leader of the community. The white stones that you can see in the photograph above are modern, but the mold itself, the hill, the artificial hill, built over a stone tomb, a stone corridor and a chamber, are prehistoric, and also some of the decorations on the stones, like those spiral shapes that you see below in close-up, are original. So again, this is not the only example of such prehistoric tombs. There are more also in the Orkneys, like Maes Howe, which is quite similar in its structure. This is an artificial hill housing a stone construction consisting of a corridor and the chamber. You can see the cross section and some images. The tomb seen from far away in the landscape. It looks almost like a natural hill, and the inside of the corridor, which is as you can see very carefully constructed. Such tombs were popular throughout the Neolithic culture, so you can find similar structures in France. We have some similar structures in Wiltshire, so in the vicinity of Stonehenge and other prehistoric monuments. So we have here West Kennet Long Barrow. Long barrows were longer. They were not kind of round hill with a shorter corridor, but a kind of long corridor covered by an elongated hill. There are lots of unresolved mysteries and questions concerning these monuments. Some archaeologists suggest that they were very carefully aligned astronomically, so on a specific date, usually the equinox or the solstice, so some important day in the year in terms of the length of day and the astronomy. The ray of sunlight actually penetrated all along this corridor and into the chamber, and very likely this had some religious or spiritual significance for the people of this period, probably relating to their belief in afterlife, in the soul and the way that human soul traveled after death. So also those geometric symbols that are carved on the stones outside those tombs and inside the corridors, inside the chambers, very likely had some significance. And there are quite a lot of hypotheses, like why those ancient or prehistoric really artists carved these shapes. A very interesting hypothesis is that these were the visions that were induced by some sort of narcotic substances that were ritually consumed during religious ceremonies. Similar shapes and symbols can be found in cave paintings worldwide, or in very old tribal traditions like the Aborigines in Australia. They have the spirals, they have the lines made of dots or such things, and one of the hypotheses, which seems quite convincing to me, is that during religious ceremonies that happened a few times during the year, probably when those sun rays penetrated the tombs, and members of the community induced some sort of visions, and they wanted to commemorate it, or to kind of immortalize those visions by the carvings. So we have the beginning of civilization and the beginning of art at the same time, practically at the same period. And Britain and British art does not definitely start with the Romans. The Romans came to find a very old and developed and mature culture. Probably the one thing that was missing from our modern perspective was, of course, the written language. So we start having written accounts on this culture from the perspective of the Romans, who conquered it and largely destroyed it. So some other relics of the Neolithic culture in Britain. So we move to Wiltshire, so we have West Kennet Long Barrow, but also other sites. If you visit Stonehenge in Wiltshire, you can also visit some other neighbouring sites. Some of them are actually even larger than Stonehenge, perhaps not as spectacular. For example, the Avebury Stone Circle, also in Wiltshire, and you can see the photograph here taken from the air, and you see those round earth structures, the long round dike made of earth, and if you look close, there are smaller stones arranged in a very large circle. The circle so large that it actually encompasses much of a much later village that is situated in the center of it. Then of course we have Stonehenge, and here we have a photograph and also a drawing showing the arrangement of the stones, also taking account of the earth structures and smaller stone circles. Some of them, most of them, do not survive. Only the remains of those larger circles were found, and also the beginning of the ceremonial road that led to Stonehenge. And again, you may find a lot of information and a lot of documentaries about precisely the monument of Stonehenge and all of the mysteries and hypotheses surrounding it. Some of them quite down to earth, like it was perhaps a burial site as well, or it was a site with some astronomical significance, marking the passing of time and the cycle of the year. So probably it was used by a religion that worshipped the sun and nature and the passing of seasons, and probably they involved in agriculture. So it could have been used to, for example, demarcate when you should sow the seeds for the next year's crop. Or, of course, there are all kinds of more elaborate and fantastical theories linking Stonehenge to the extraterrestrials and some mystical signs and sites throughout not only Britain but Europe and sometimes even world culture. I don't know, these are interesting stories in their own right, but I'm not convinced by them as to their truthfulness. But what I would like to show you now are some of the ways that Stonehenge as the monument inspired later artists. Those of you who read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, the novel, the late Victorian novel by Thomas Hardy, probably remember the last scene, so spoiler alert if you haven't, when the heroine is found and actually apprehended by the police. She is on the run, and she gets at night, kind of stumbles to the site of Stonehenge, and in the morning as the sun is rising she's found by the police sleeping on one of the overturned stones as a kind of human sacrifice, so in a very symbolic scene. This definitely shows you how important Stonehenge and the mystery surrounding Stonehenge was for the later artists. And now I would like to show you two paintings by two of Britain's greatest landscape artists, Joseph Mallord, William Turner and John Constable. They were both active in the first half of the 19th century, mostly in the Romantic period. We'll talk about them, we'll have like a separate week devoted to their art only. But just to give you the idea, two examples of how they used Stonehenge as inspiration. So the one that is slightly earlier is by Turner, and it shows Stonehenge with a flock of sheep and a very dramatic sky with the thunderstorm receding. So we can see the lightning in the sky, and if you look close, probably the lightning struck the stones or perhaps even the flock of sheep themselves, and there is a man lying on the ground in the foreground. We do not know whether he is injured or dead. There is a very distressed dog next to him, barking, wailing. So it's like the curse of these old stones, the curse of the mystery of Stonehenge. If we compare it to Constable's version, his rendition of Stonehenge is also connected to the dramatic light and sky effects, but this is after the storm. We have a double rainbow forming just as if from the stones themselves, so perhaps they are the mystery, they are the treasure at the end of the rainbow. And there are also some people added here, possibly for scale, but they look more like tourists. They look more like people who just want to have a nice picnic, an interesting excursion, and to visit this ancient site. So the mystery and the drama of these ancient stones remains inspirational, probably even to this day. And we continue in a moment.